Hi, my name is Lance and I'll be presenting my thesis called Lambanugan. It's the renewal of Lambanog production typology and its territorial identity using environmental symbology and Tayaras Quezon. And before I begin, I want to share with you what drove me to study more about the Filipino drinking culture. First was when I noticed how we Filipinos drink not for hedonistic purposes, but for socializing with people we value in life. I've participated in obscure rituals and practices I've only seen here that involves lighting up gin before mixing it with pomelo juice, all while creating a vortex in the glass bottle, which is locally called gin bilog. This method sparks a debate whether or not it actually affects the taste of the concoction, but nonetheless it's a ritual that created an identity or a memory unique to who we are. I've also found that the act of drinking together while passing on a single shot glass created a sense of camaraderie and strengthened the bond between people and friends, making it an important cultural practice in our community. And so, with that, I made a metaphorical representation of my thesis in the form of a damawana bottle. It represents the origin of the story and goes down to the thesis proposal, which is the process of the story. So to start the origin, society can be described as people living together in a more or less ordered community. To find what makes them a society, the study looks into eating and drinking, since food and drinks are used as a sign of identity or alterity. The consumption and production of alcohol and wine are often embedded in the culture in which it resides. For the Philippines, one distinct product is the Lambanog. Filipino celebrations are not a celebration without food and drinks. Serving drinks is essential for Filipino celebrations as we enjoy fiestas, drinking, and good company. This means that it is an integral part of our culture and a sign of Filipino hospitality. According to Alejandro Rosas' short story, We Filipinos Are Mild Drinkers, Lambanog represents the Filipino culture and traditions compared to the American way of hedonistic drinking. This uniqueness of culture on a place is what can be called regional identity. In a local sense, it is called territorial identity. With a total area of 30 million hectares, 30% of which is agricultural, the Philippines is an agricultural nation. The majority of those harvest areas is coconuts, which makes it an important part of Philippines as a whole and should warrant more attention. Coconuts are also essential as its sap serves as the only source of Lambanog. In a few years, Philippine Lambanog will become a trademark product as it competes with the global names. According to Hareya and Epleni, one of the wine industry's challenges moving forward is to reconcile wine productions with the environment and culture. However, the identity of Lambanog is already at risk of losing its heritage. The loss of cultural traditions and ownership may result in decreased social cohesion and general mental health issues. This is encapsulated by a phrase called cultural loss. To remember the past and how the Filipino society once were, cultural heritage must be examined and reaffirmed. With traditions and rituals of socialization like Tagayan and Mukmukan slowly fading, it indicates a sign of cultural loss. I'm pretty sure you viewers have seen news of deaths caused by this local beverage, and this results in the generalized skepticism on Lambanog. With several constraints plaguing the industry, the methanol poisoning scandal led to even more public distrust in Lambanog. But if we were to lose the very essence of our identity, what would become of us? Can we ever hope to rediscover it? Or are we forever lost? These are the questions that this study aims to answer through the goals and objectives, which are to identify and translate the cultural practices that makes up the Lambanog identity, and to create a Lambanog production typology that reaffirms its territorial identity, and lastly, to provoke topophilia and teraphilia between the people and their setting or place using Lambanog as a core. This slide explains the significance of the study as it is also an attempt to explore methods of applying knowledge on heritage and identity instead of relying on impermanent technical knowledge to facilitate design, the result of which should create spaces for culture to thrive. In line with that, what keeps culture alive is not solely the drink itself, but also the people who have attached memories to the environment where traditions and rituals were practiced. Here are some attempts to link wine and culture to create architecture that is sensitive to the context where it resides. Given the contrast between creating a culturally rooted architectural space versus globalization and modernization of Lambanog production, This study explores ways to operationalize identity as a source for architectural development. The theoretical framework involves three models that work side by side to create a culture-centered Lambanog production typology. The Identera model identifies landscapes and lifestyles that makes up territorial identity. The socio-physical model of interrelationship then translates these intangible values into tangible ones. The vernacular value model translates domestic cultural practices and building processes into forms. Together, it induces teraphilia, which is one's longingness for a place that encourages local development interventions, resulting in a circular process that makes people continuously develop a place more and more. As for the conceptual framework, those three models are applied to the context of Lambanog culture, making a more linear process. By using the short story of "We Filipinos are mild drinkers" as a constant variable, this framework could be applied for future studies that involves Lambanog. To find the right distillery to base this project on, I looked into the southern Tagalog region where Lambanog is traditionally made. Some say it's where Lambanog originated. At the center of the region, Tayabas, Quezon has been the Lambanog capital of the Philippines, where three major distilleries are located. And amongst 12 DTI-endorsed Lambanog makers, the oldest distillery dates back to 1908, while the next one wouldn't be there until 61 years later, and they are called Malyari Distillery. Malyari is located near the foot of Mount Manahaw with around 13 hectares of land, a lot of which are lined with coconut trees. And these are the site analysis. Climate studies show that its average temperature is colder relative to Metro Manila. And that concludes the first part of this presentation. Next is the architectural process, which starts with the site parameters. This includes the existing and proposed program for the distillery, some of which is the dwelling spaces of families of workers currently residing in the place, which is followed by the breakdown of landscape and lifestyle using the Identera model. And this is the daily ritual timeline with a weekly ritual timeline. This is to study the daily happening of each category of stakeholders to create a path that informs the design later. And this is the Lambanog process diagram from sap collection to packaging and storing. These are the recreational activities, and this is the vernacular architecture study. The model is directly derived from the theoretical framework, and by dissecting the building culture into three parts: internal, actual, and adjacent. Internal is what they believe to be the ideal setting for their own built environment. The actual is what they actually have, and adjacent is what they have around them adjacent to the site. And this is the breakdown of the actual, noting the use of copper pot stills to remove unpleasant sulfuric congenes, making the final product in Malyari taste better. And this is the adjacent studies. Furthermore, to find the very character of Lambanog production is to find the essence of what makes this place very unique. What I've noticed right when you enter the site is the vast amount of coconut trees standing around the site. And from an excerpt from We Filipinos on Mad Drinkers, he said, "The coconut tree represents the Philippines. It stands up to the sky," which can be translated into an architectural value of verticality. And next is who uses these coconuts and who interacts with them. The mangangarit is also known as the hero of Lambanog, as without them, there will be no Lambanog. And what makes their job possible is through the use of karitan. These are what they use to collect coconut sap without having to go down every tree. The karitan would therefore be the essential confidant to allow the hero to complete his duty. This is the graphic representation of the karitan system, and to study the value of it for the mangangarit, which they use for connectivity, functionality, and passage, and its physical properties are parallel and linear. To utilize those properties, the architectural values of parallel and linear must be translated into artifacts. So by using the origin of parallel lines, we can create a shape rule using coconut lumber. And these set of rules then create a shape language. And these rules can be seen in these drawings following a basic composition, starting from the origin to a functional layout into the specific parts of creating architecture. And a sample of the derivation of those rules are these, which are used in the final product. And next is how to plan the site. The human environment is a symbolic system of communal meaning. Humans shape their environment, encoding it with symbolic language, which means that it regulates social norms as well. To study this symbolic language is where some environmental symbology comes in. It is the study of the meaning of space, examines frames and how they shape and are shaped by human inhabitants. Within this concept are artifacts. And artifacts are the manifestation of cultural practices. It can be an object, environmental feature, or applied decoration within the environment. And an observable arrangement of those artifacts can be called a constellation. For the Lambanugan, artifacts are not just used for objects, but a whole system of processes. The first one is the pugon, the place where artisans create and manipulate Lambanog. The second one is the Tagayan, where the ritual of Lambanog drinking is celebrated. It's a place where sociocultural actions take place. And the third one is the Tahanan, which is the home, a place where family and friends join together in laughter. And within those artifacts are the symbolic motifs, namely the den, edge, mystery, journey, and threshold. It's where a prominently recurring theme of symbolic meaning is used. Together, the artifacts and the symbolic motifs makes up the built environment. With the use of environmental symbology and the paths created by the ritual timeline, I was able to plot down the foundation for the experience of the artifacts. And this was done without touching any single coconut tree in the site. Going back to the breakdown of the distilleries, landscapes, and lifestyles, a bubble diagram can be formed. And these bubbles are color-coded to their respective artifacts. By using that bubble diagram, I was able to create a site development plan. And with the plotting of environmental symbology, the journey starts here in the entrance. To start your experience, you are greeted with the existing karitan systems within the site. The foyer is made by abiding by the Euclidean transformations of the shape grammars, and a grid is created to create the spaces and direct the users towards objects of interest. And right when you enter the foyer, your eyes will be directed towards the distillery itself. And the planar walls acts as a boundary. The next is the alchemy room, where the drinks are mixed with several different local fruits. And this is the step-by-step process of creating the alchemy room, starting with the horizontal parallel lines. And the second step connects those lines in a restricted 30-degree rotation from each line. And planar connections are made to create a niche for placing Lambanog bottles for cellaring. Next is to create volumes created by those lines, translating into an architectural boundary. This is the interior of the alchemy room, borrowing details from the distillery itself. And these are the plants. You can see the soaking area where Lambanog is infused with grapes, prunes, or local berries such as lipote. And the next thing that you will see is the receiving area and the coarse filtration area of the pugon process. And behind those are the storage areas. To start the coarse filtration area, here's my party for the filtration and fermentation systems, strictly abiding by the shape rules and its transformations. You can see the parallel lines from the structural supports to the pipes that connects it to the distillery. And here's the render view of those filtration pipes from here to the fermentation area. For the fermentation process, the filtered coconut sap is fermented for about 4 days before being transferred into the distillery. And these copper pipes carry those fermented sap directly into the copper pot stills. To start with the distillery, here's the plan, followed by the process. So it starts with the parameters and extraction of the shape rule from the Karitan system, and by rotating the origin, it will create 4 pockets which will house the 4 copper pot stills. After that is the functional layout, which is to complete the set of physical requirements for the tagaluto to create Lambanog. And the results are these spaces, and next are these specific parts to complete the plan, namely the wash basin and the doors. The heart of Lambanog production is the pugon, and within that is the distilling pot. For the ritual of lutuan, which is the traditional Lambanog process, which is designed in a step-by-step process from 1 to 6. And at the end of the process is the alcohol hydrometer, a tool used to verify the exact alcohol content of the spirit. It's used so that the product are kept within the safe alcohol content. And these are the drawings for the distillery itself. And this is a section showing how people can move around the space and complete their ritual. And here's the exterior of the distillery right beside the Tagayan areas. On the site development plan, you can notice that the Tagayan areas are scattered across the site so that people drinking can experience being surrounded by the processes of Lambanog making. So to start with the Tagayan process is the ritual of socialization. According to an excerpt from We Filipinos Are Mal Drinkers, he said, "I poured some of my drink on the bamboo floor. It went through the slits to the ground below. It shows the societal norm of this ritual, which can then be represented by an architectural value of permeable floors. And since the ritual involves a circulation of drinking turns, the architecture reflects this by having a circular form. And next is the perforated flooring, and then the Tagayan table, which allows each participant to reach the center, and additional seating for music and entertainment since it's part of the culture to play music while drinking. And this is the drawing of how people could practice the ritual of Tagayan. And this is the final Tagayan room, which uses a triangular layout, borrowing from the kitchen triangle concept, since the ritual also involves inviting passerbys to drink along with a group, which I've also experienced when visiting the site. And that completes the pugon and Tagayan artifacts. And the last and final artifact is the Tahanan, or home, which is again derived from the shape rules created earlier. And these are the perspective of the kitchen area where people come together. And this is the axiomatic view of the shape rule, which is used also as a structural system. And this is the view of the alfresco dining, where the mangangaris can stop by and rest. And lastly, the Salle area, which is the living area for the community living there. And here's an overview of the site. So in conclusion, when embedded symbolism is driven by its territorial identity, it can introduce architecture that is a translation of what makes people who they are. And that's all for now. Thank you for listening.
The coconut nut is a giant nut. If you eat too much, you get very fat. Now, the coconut nut is a big, big nut, but this delicious nut is not a nut.